The morning sun cast long shadows across the Galactic Combat Academy as Ambassador Vex stepped out of her sleek diplomatic transport. Her tall, elegant frame moved with the grace typical of the Zenthri species, silver skin gleaming under the Academy's artificial lighting system. Behind her, two junior diplomats struggled to keep pace with her long strides. "Welcome to the Academy, Ambassador," greeted Director Quinn, a four-armed being whose multiple eyes blinked in sequence. "We are honored to host a representative of the Zenthri Empire." Vex nodded curtly, her violet eyes scanning the sprawling complex before them. Training ground stretched in every direction, filled with beings from dozens of different worlds. The sound of combat practice echoed across the facility as students honed their skills under the watchful eyes of their instructors. "I trust this visit will prove educational," Vex replied, her voice carrying the musical quality common to her people. "The Empire is always interested in evaluating the military capabilities of other species." As they walked through the main courtyard, Vex observed the various training sessions in progress. Massive Goroth warriors, each standing nearly 3 meters tall, practiced with weapons that would have crushed most beings. Their thick, stone-like hide provided natural armor that made them nearly invulnerable to conventional attacks. "Impressive specimens," Vex commented, watching one Goroth lift a training weight that must have massed several tons. "The Goroth have always been formidable allies." Director Quinn's primary eyes focused on the Zenthri ambassador while his secondary eyes continued monitoring the surrounding activities. "Indeed, they are among our strongest students. But strength comes in many forms here at the Academy." They moved on to observe a group of Krillian cadets engaged in combat drills. These insectoid beings moved with lightning speed, their natural chitinous armor gleaming as they struck and parried with precision that bordered on the supernatural. Their compound eyes tracked multiple targets simultaneously while their four arms wielded weapons with deadly efficiency. "The Krillians are equally impressive," Vex noted with approval. "Speed and natural armor combined with tactical intelligence. The Empire has had profitable relationships with their hive worlds." As they continued the tour, Vex encountered representatives from many of the galaxy's warrior races. The crystalline Vorthan gleamed like living diamonds as they practiced energy manipulation. Aquatic Delphins demonstrated their ability to fight in multiple environments, their sleek forms moving through both air and water-filled training chambers. Each species brought unique advantages to galactic warfare. Then they reached a section where a different group was training. "And here we have our human contingent," Director Quinn announced as they approached a relatively modest training area. Vex stopped and stared at the beings before her. Compared to the imposing aliens she had just observed, the humans seemed almost laughably inadequate. They stood barely 2 meters tall at their highest, with soft, pale skin that looked like it would bruise at the slightest touch. No natural armor, no additional limbs, no obvious enhanced senses or supernatural abilities. "These are warriors?" Vex asked, her musical voice carrying clear skepticism. A group of human cadets was engaged in hand-to-hand combat training under the supervision of an older human male. The instructor called out corrections and encouragement as his students worked through various techniques. Despite their obvious physical limitations, Vex noticed that the humans moved with determination and focus. "They are students, like all the others," Director Quinn replied diplomatically. "But surely not serious candidates for actual combat roles," Vex pressed. "They appear to lack every advantage that makes a species suitable for warfare. No natural weapons, no armor, no enhanced physical capabilities." She gestured toward where a human cadet had just been thrown to the ground by his sparring partner. "They seem more suited to clerical work than combat." The human instructor looked up at the sound of voices and approached their group. "Director Quinn, I hope our session is not disturbing your tour." "Not at all, Ben," the director replied. "Ambassador Vex, may I introduce Instructor Ben Torres. He oversees our human combat training program." Ben extended his hand toward Vex in the human custom of greeting. She looked at the offered appendage with mild distaste before giving it a brief, reluctant clasp. "A pleasure to meet you, Ambassador," Ben said with genuine warmth despite her obvious disdain. I hope you find our training methods interesting. Interesting is certainly one word for it, Vex replied coolly. Though I confess to wondering why humans are included in military training at all. Surely there are other roles better suited to your species' limitations. Ben's expression remained pleasant, though something shifted behind his eyes. We may not look like much compared to the other species represented here, but humans have our own strengths. Such as? Vex challenged, her tone making clear she expected no satisfactory answer. Adaptability, for one thing, Ben replied. Persistence. The ability to find creative solutions when conventional approaches fail. Vex laughed, the sound carrying across the training ground and causing several students to look in their direction. Creativity is hardly a substitute for claws or armor in actual combat. Perhaps not, Ben agreed mildly. But it has served us well in our conflicts. What conflicts could humans possibly have engaged in that would test them against real warriors? Vex asked dismissively. Minor disputes with other weak species, perhaps. Director Quinn shifted uncomfortably, his multiple eyes darting between the ambassador and the human instructor. Ambassador, perhaps we should continue the tour. But Vex was enjoying herself now. She had found something to amuse her during what had otherwise been a routine diplomatic obligation. No, please, I am genuinely curious. Instructor Torres, enlighten me. What great military achievements can humanity claim? Ben studied the Zenthari ambassador for a long moment before responding. We have participated in several significant conflicts, Ambassador. The Siege of Proxima Station, the Battle of the Asteroid Fields, the defense of New Geneva. Participated, Vex repeated, emphasizing the word mockingly. As support personnel, I assume. Logistics, perhaps communications. Actually, human forces played central roles in each of those engagements, Ben replied, his voice remaining steady despite the obvious provocation. Vex turned to address the mixed group of alien students who had gathered to listen to the exchange. Students, look at this human and tell me honestly, would you want him watching your back in combat? Would you trust your life to such a fragile being? Several of the alien students shifted uncomfortably. A young Krillian spoke up hesitantly, actually, Ambassador, humans have a reputation for reliability in combat situations. Reputation, Vex scoffed. Built on what foundation? Propaganda? Wishful thinking? On experience, said a deep voice from behind her. Vex turned to see a massive Gorath student, his stone-like features set in an expression of mild disagreement. My clan has fought alongside humans. They do not break when others would. Touching, Vex replied with sarcasm. But I remain unconvinced. Physical prowess cannot be replaced by mere stubbornness. Ben stepped forward slightly. Ambassador, if you are genuinely interested in human military capabilities, perhaps a demonstration would be more informative than speculation. What sort of demonstration? Vex asked, intrigued despite herself. Tomorrow morning, I can arrange for you to observe a combat exercise featuring one of our most experienced practitioners, Ben replied. Someone whose record might address your concerns about human effectiveness in warfare. Vex considered this offer. The diplomatic mission required her to spend 3 days at the academy anyway, and this promised to be more entertaining than sitting through standard briefings. Very well, Instructor Torres. I accept your invitation. Though I suspect it will only confirm what I already know about human limitations. Perhaps, Ben said with a slight smile. Or perhaps you might be surprised. As the tour group prepared to move on, Vex noticed the human students had resumed their training with renewed intensity. She also observed that students from other species were watching the humans more carefully now, some with expressions of curiosity rather than dismissal. Who is this experienced practitioner you plan to summon? Vex asked as they walked away from the training area. Someone with extensive field experience, Ben replied carefully. His name is Rio. Commander Rio Santos. Director Quinn's multiple eyes widened slightly at the mention of the name. Ben, are you certain that is wise? The ambassador requested a demonstration of human military capability, Ben answered. Rio can provide that better than anyone. Vex noticed the exchange between the director and the instructor but chose not to press for details. Tomorrow would provide all the answers she needed. She was confident that no single human, regardless of experience, could demonstrate anything that would challenge her assessment of their species. As evening approached and the Academy's training activities wound down, Vex retired to her guest quarters. Through her window, she could see lights in the human training areas where students continued practicing long after their peers from other species had finished for the day. Determination without ability is merely stubbornness, she murmured to herself before closing the window screens. But despite her confident words, something about Instructor Ben's quiet assurance nagged at her thoughts as she prepared for sleep. Tomorrow would settle the matter once and for all, and she looked forward to finally putting to rest any ridiculous notions about human military capability. In the distance, a transport ship's navigation lights appeared in the night sky, growing brighter as it approached the Academy's landing facilities. Vex paid it no attention, unaware that her comfortable assumptions about humanity were about to face their greatest challenge. The morning air carried a chill as Ambassador Vex made her way to the main courtyard where Instructor Ben had promised to demonstrate human military capabilities. She had slept poorly, her dreams filled with images of the various warrior species she had observed the previous day. The contrast between their obvious physical advantages and human frailty remained stark in her mind. Director Quinn waited near the central platform, his multiple eyes tracking the approaching transport ship that descended through the Academy's atmospheric shield. The vessel bore the scars of countless battles, its hull patched and repaired in numerous places. Despite its battered appearance, the ship moved with the precision of expert piloting. "Your demonstration is arriving," Vex observed, noting the ship's condition. Though the state of their transport hardly inspires confidence. Ben stood nearby, watching the landing with an expression Vex could not quite interpret. "That ship has seen more action than most entire fleets," he said quietly. "Every mark on its hull represents a mission completed, lives saved." The transport touched down with barely a whisper, settling onto the landing pad with practiced ease. A small crowd of students and instructors had gathered to watch, representing dozens of different species. Vex noticed that even the normally composed Krillians seemed to shift with anticipation. The ship's ramp descended with a hydraulic hiss, releasing a cloud of vapor into the morning air. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a figure appeared in the doorway. Commander Rio Santos stepped into the light, and Vex felt her breath catch despite herself. He was undeniably human, possessing the same basic physical characteristics she had dismissed the day before. But something about his presence commanded immediate attention. His movements carried an economy of motion that spoke of countless hours in combat zones. Scars marked his visible skin, each one telling a story of survival against impossible odds. He wore a simple military uniform, faded from use and marked with insignia Vex did not recognize. A single duffel bag contained all his possessions. Despite his modest appearance, silence fell across the assembled crowd as he walked toward them. "Commander," Ben stepped forward to greet the newcomer. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Rio's weathered face creased in a slight smile. "Ben, you know I could never refuse one of your requests. Though I have to admit, I am curious about why you needed me here." Before Ben could respond, Director Quinn approached with obvious respect. "Commander Santos, the Academy is honored by your presence. Your reputation precedes you throughout the galaxy." Vex watched this exchange with growing confusion. The alien director, who commanded respect from warriors of every species, was treating this single human with unusual deference. She decided to interrupt before the situation became even more puzzling. "Commander Santos," she said, stepping forward with diplomatic authority. "I am Ambassador Vex of the Zenthari Empire. I understand you are here to demonstrate human military capabilities." Rio turned to study her with sharp eyes that seemed to take in every detail instantly. "Ambassador," he nodded politely. Ben mentioned that you had questions about human effectiveness in combat situations. Questions is putting it mildly, Vex replied with her characteristic directness. I have observed many warrior species during my diplomatic career, and humans appear to lack every physical advantage necessary for military success. A low murmur ran through the crowd of students. Several alien voices could be heard discussing Rio's presence in hushed tones. Vex caught fragments of conversation that surprised her. That is the human from the Siege of Titan base, whispered a young Gorath whose stone-like features showed unusual animation. My instructor said he once held off an entire Skarn fleet by himself, added a Krillian student, her compound eyes focusing intently on Rio. Impossible, another voice countered. No single being could accomplish such a feat. Vex felt a flicker of uncertainty. The reactions of the alien students suggested that Rio's reputation extended far beyond human circles. She turned to Director Quinn with a questioning expression. Director, surely these stories are exaggerated. Military legends often grow beyond their factual foundations. Director Quinn's multiple eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of careful consideration among his species. Ambassador, I have access to official military records from across the galaxy. Commander Santos's achievements are well documented. Such as? Vex challenged, though her tone carried less certainty than the previous day. The Battle of Kepler Station, Director Quinn began, consulting a data pad. Commander Santos led a force of 12 humans against a Skarn invasion fleet of over 200 ships. The station's defenses had failed, and evacuation was impossible. 12 against 200. Vex laughed, though the sound rang hollow. The mathematics alone make such a claim ridiculous. The humans held the line for 6 hours, Director Quinn continued steadily. Long enough for reinforcements to arrive and drive off the invaders. 40,000 colonists survived because of their actions. Rio stepped forward slightly, his expression uncomfortable with the attention. Director, those numbers do not tell the real story. We had significant defensive advantages, and the Skarn were not expecting organized resistance. He minimizes his own achievements, Ben said to Vex. That is typical of human military culture. Vex studied Rio more carefully. His modest demeanor conflicted with the extraordinary claims being made about his abilities. Either this was an elaborate deception, or she had fundamentally misunderstood something about human nature. A crystalline Vorthan instructor approached the group, her diamond-like form reflecting the morning light in brilliant patterns. Commander Santos, my students have studied the Battle of Proxima Fields in our tactical courses. How did you coordinate defensive positions across such a wide area with limited communication equipment? Rio considered the question seriously before answering. We adapted to the circumstances, instructor. When conventional tactics fail, you find alternatives. But the official reports indicate you maintained cohesive defensive lines despite being outnumbered 50-1, the Vorthan pressed. My analysis suggests such coordination should have been impossible. Impossible is a word that gets used too often in military planning, Rio replied with a slight smile. Difficult, expensive, dangerous, certainly. But rarely impossible. Vex found herself leaning forward despite her skepticism. Commander, assuming these accounts have some basis in reality, how do you explain human success against such overwhelming odds? Rio looked at her directly, his expression thoughtful. Ambassador, what advantages do you think the Zenthri possess in military conflicts? The question caught Vex off guard. Superior technology, obviously. Enhanced mental capabilities. Advanced strategic planning abilities. All significant advantages, Rio agreed. But what happens when technology fails? When plans encounter unexpected complications? When the carefully calculated strategy meets chaotic reality? Proper preparation prevents such failures, Vex replied automatically. No amount of preparation can prevent every possible failure, Rio said gently. Equipment breaks, communications fail, allies do not arrive when expected. In those moments, survival depends on adaptability and determination rather than initial advantages. A young Delphinian student raised one of her aquatic appendages. "Commander, is it true that humans continue fighting even when victory becomes impossible?" Rio paused before answering, clearly choosing his words carefully. "We fight until the mission is complete or we cannot continue. Sometimes that means fighting longer than other species might consider reasonable." "That sounds like simple stubbornness," Vex interjected, though her tone lacked its earlier confidence. "Perhaps," Rio acknowledged. "But stubbornness can be valuable when lives depend on completing the mission." Ben stepped forward, sensing the conversation had reached the right moment. "Commander, Ambassador Vex has requested a demonstration of human military capabilities. Would you be willing to participate in a combat simulation?" Rio glanced around at the assembled crowd of students and instructors. "What kind of simulation did you have in mind?" Director Quinn consulted his data pad again. "We have several scenarios designed to test different aspects of military skill. The Titan base recreation has proven particularly challenging." Several alien students exchanged glances at the mention of that simulation. Vex noticed their reactions with growing curiosity. "What makes this simulation particularly challenging?" she asked. "It recreates the conditions of one of the most difficult defensive actions in galactic military history," Director Quinn explained. "The scenario requires a single participant to coordinate multiple defensive positions against overwhelming enemy forces." "Success rate?" Rio inquired with professional interest. 0%, Ben answered bluntly. The simulation was designed as a training exercise to teach students about impossible tactical situations. It demonstrates why certain positions cannot be held regardless of effort or skill. Vex felt a surge of satisfaction. Finally, they would expose the limitations of human military capability in a controlled environment. "How appropriate," she said with renewed confidence. "A simulation designed to demonstrate tactical impossibility." Rio studied the faces around him, noting the mixture of anticipation and concern among the alien observers. "And you want me to attempt this impossible scenario?" "Only if you are willing," Ben replied. "Though I should warn you, the simulation is designed to be psychologically as well as tactically challenging." "Meaning?" Vex asked. Director Quinn activated a holographic display showing the simulation parameters. "The scenario includes civilian populations, limited resources, and multiple simultaneous objectives. Participants must make decisions under extreme pressure while facing inevitable failure." Rio examined the display with professional attention to detail. The scenario was indeed complex, requiring coordination of defensive systems across a wide area while protecting non-combatant populations from a massive enemy assault. "How long do participants typically last before admitting defeat?" he asked. "The average is 37 minutes, Director Quinn replied. "The record is held by a Gorath warrior who maintained resistance for 91 minutes. Vex smiled with anticipation. Even if Rio matched the current record, it would only demonstrate that humans could delay the inevitable slightly longer than average. The simulation would provide concrete proof of human limitations. "I accept," Rio said simply. As the group moved toward the simulation facility, Vex noticed that word of the demonstration had spread throughout the academy. Students and instructors from dozens of species gathered to witness the event. Many seemed genuinely interested in Rio's performance, while others appeared skeptical of human capabilities. "This should be educational," Vex murmured to herself, looking forward to the vindication of her assessment. But as they approached the simulation chamber, she caught sight of Rio's expression. Despite the impossible nature of the challenge ahead, he showed no signs of concern or doubt. Instead, his weathered features carried the calm focus of someone preparing for familiar work. For the first time since her arrival, Ambassador Vex felt a flicker of uncertainty about the outcome. The simulation chamber hummed with energy as technicians completed their final preparations. Ambassador Vex positioned herself at the main observation window, flanked by Director Quinn and Instructor Ben. Around them, representatives from dozens of species gathered to witness the demonstration that would either validate or shatter her beliefs about human military capability. Rio stood in the center of the chamber, examining the control interfaces that would govern his defensive systems during the simulation. The Titan base scenario materialized around him in perfect holographic detail, creating the illusion of a vast military installation under siege. Simulation parameters confirmed, announced the lead technician. Enemy force strength set to maximum intensity. Civilian population markers active. Resource limitations engaged. Vex leaned forward, studying the tactical display that showed the approaching enemy fleet. The numbers were staggering, thousands of hostile ships converging on a single defensive position. Even with the base's automated systems, the scenario appeared genuinely impossible. "Commander Santos, you may begin when ready," Director Quinn announced through the communication system. Rio nodded and moved to the primary command console. As the simulation activated, Vex watched enemy forces appear on the tactical screens, their overwhelming numbers creating a red wave that seemed to fill the entire display. "Incoming transmission from Titan Base Command," the simulation announced. "Enemy fleet detected. Estimated time to engagement, 15 minutes. Evacuation ships are 90 minutes from departure. You must hold the line." Vex expected Rio to immediately begin deploying the base's heaviest weapons, as most participants did when facing such odds. Instead, he spent precious seconds studying the tactical situation, his fingers dancing across multiple displays as he gathered information. "What is he doing?" Vex asked, puzzled by the apparent delay. "The enemy will be in range soon." Ben watched Rio's methodical approach with obvious approval. He is understanding the battlefield before committing to action. Most participants focus on immediate threats without considering the larger picture. As the first enemy ships entered weapons range, Rio made his initial moves. But rather than concentrating all firepower on the largest threats, he targeted specific ships in a pattern that seemed random to Vex's trained military mind. "His target selection makes no tactical sense," she observed. "Those ships pose minimal immediate danger." Director Quinn's multiple eyes focused on different aspects of the display. "Actually, Ambassador, he appears to be disrupting their formation integrity. Each ship he eliminates forces the others to adjust their approach vectors." Vex studied the enemy movement patterns more carefully and realized the director was correct. Rio's seemingly scattered attacks were creating chaos in the enemy formation, forcing them to waste time reorganizing rather than pressing their assault. "Clever," she admitted grudgingly. "But ultimately futile. No amount of tactical cleverness can overcome such numerical disadvantage." The simulation progressed as enemy forces continued their relentless advance. Rio managed his defensive resources with careful precision, never wasting ammunition on targets beyond effective range, always prioritizing threats that posed the greatest immediate danger to the civilian evacuation. 20 minutes into the simulation, multiple warning alarms began sounding. Primary defensive systems had sustained heavy damage, and secondary positions were under direct assault. Most previous participants had admitted defeat at this point, recognizing the hopelessness of their situation. Rio continued fighting. "Defensive grid integrity at 30%, the simulation announced. Multiple hull breaches detected. Life support systems failing in sectors 7 through 12. Instead of acknowledging defeat, Rio began rerouting power from non-essential systems to maintain critical defenses. When primary weapons failed, he switched to backup systems. When backup systems overloaded, he found ways to jury-rig temporary solutions using equipment never intended for combat purposes. "This is extraordinary," whispered a Vorthan instructor, her crystalline form reflecting her amazement. "He is adapting faster than the simulation can present new challenges." Vex watched in growing fascination as Rio demonstrated capabilities she had never witnessed in any other species. When conventional tactics failed, he invented new ones. When equipment broke down, he found alternative approaches that should not have worked but somehow did. "How is he maintaining defensive effectiveness with such limited resources?" she asked, her earlier skepticism giving way to genuine curiosity. Human adaptability, Ben replied simply. We excel at finding solutions when none should exist. 30 minutes passed, then 40, then 50. The simulation continued throwing impossible challenges at Rio, yet somehow he continued to respond effectively. His approach bore no resemblance to the careful, methodical tactics favored by other species. Instead, he seemed to thrive on chaos, turning each new crisis into an opportunity for creative problem-solving. At the 60-minute mark, something unprecedented happened. Enemy forces that should have overwhelmed the defensive position began showing signs of disorganization. Rio's unconventional tactics had created a cascade of unexpected problems in their assault plan. Impossible, breathed a Gorath instructor whose species prided itself on tactical expertise. The simulation parameters do not allow for enemy tactical failure. Director Quinn checked his instruments frantically. The simulation is functioning normally. Commander Santos's defensive actions are generating legitimate tactical responses from the enemy AI. Vex stared at the displays in disbelief. Rio had not only survived longer than any previous participant, he was actually beginning to achieve tactical success against overwhelming odds. His refusal to accept defeat was somehow creating possibilities that had not existed before. Civilian evacuation 70% complete, the simulation announced. Remaining population transfer estimated at 20 minutes. Rio had accomplished something the scenario designers believed impossible. He had bought enough time for the majority of civilians to escape. But the simulation was far from over. Enemy reinforcements were arriving, and his defensive systems were hanging on by the thinnest of margins. Commander Santos, Director Quinn spoke through the communication system. You have achieved an unprecedented result. The evacuation is nearly complete. You may end the simulation with honor. Rio's response came through clearly. Sir, there are still civilians on this base. The mission continues. Vex felt something stir inside her chest, an emotion she could not immediately identify. She watched as Rio continued his impossible defense, knowing that every additional minute he bought meant more lives saved. Why does he continue? She asked quietly. He has already proven whatever point this demonstration was meant to make. Ben turned to look at her directly. Because that is what humans do, Ambassador. We do not quit while others depend on us. The final 20 minutes of the simulation became something approaching legend. Rio fought with equipment that should not have functioned. Using tactics that violated conventional military doctrine, and somehow continued to hold a position that every tactical analysis said was indefensible. When the last civilian evacuation ship cleared the base perimeter, the simulation finally ended. Rio stood alone in the command center of a base that existed more as debris than functioning installation, surrounded by the wreckage of what had once been humanity's most advanced defensive position. Simulation complete, the announcement echoed through the observation chamber. Mission objective achieved. All civilian personnel successfully evacuated. The chamber fell silent as technicians deactivated the holographic environment. Rio emerged from the simulation chamber, sweat-stained and exhausted but still standing. His legs shook slightly from fatigue, but his eyes remained alert and focused. Vex approached him slowly, her mind struggling to process what she had witnessed. Commander Santos, she began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. Ambassador, he replied with a slight nod, accepting a water container from one of the technicians. I have observed military exercises across the galaxy, she said carefully. I have never seen anything like what just occurred in that simulation. Rio considered her words before responding. Ambassador, humans may not be the strongest or fastest species in the galaxy. We lack natural armor, enhanced senses, or supernatural abilities. But we have something that serves us well in military situations. Which is? Vex asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. We do not accept that something is impossible just because it appears difficult, Rio replied. When others have given up, we continue. When conventional solutions fail, we find unconventional ones. When the mission seems hopeless, we remember why it matters. Vex looked around at the gathered alien observers, noting their expressions of respect and admiration. Students who had dismissed human capabilities the previous day now watched Rio with something approaching awe. "You fought that simulation knowing you could not win," she observed. "I fought that simulation because others were counting on me to try," Rio corrected gently. "Winning and losing are not always the most important considerations." Director Quinn approached with his data pad, still reviewing the simulation results. "Commander, you held that position for 93 minutes. The previous record was 91 minutes, and that warrior had access to heavier defensive systems." "The Gorath who set that record fought well," Rio acknowledged. "But he fought to win. I fought to buy time. Different objectives sometimes require different approaches." Vex felt the last of her certainty crumble away. Everything she thought she knew about military effectiveness had been challenged by this single demonstration. Human capabilities could not be measured using the same criteria applied to other species. "Ambassador," Rio addressed her directly. "I hope this demonstration has been helpful, but I want you to understand something important. What you witnessed today was not superhuman. Any human military officer could have performed similarly given the same circumstances." "Impossible," Vex protested automatically. "Actually, quite possible," Ben interjected. "Human military training emphasizes adaptability and persistence above raw physical capability. We prepare for situations where conventional advantages are unavailable." Vex turned to face the assembled crowd of alien students and instructors. "Is this true? Do humans regularly perform at such levels?" A young Krillian student spoke up hesitantly. "Ambassador, my family fought alongside human forces in the border conflicts. They said humans never retreated, even when retreat was the logical choice. My clan leaders speak of human reliability," added a massive Gorath. "When humans commit to a defensive position, that position will be held regardless of cost." More voices joined the conversation as alien observers shared their experiences with human military forces. Gradually, a picture emerged of a species that compensated for physical limitations through sheer determination and creative problem-solving. "I believe I owe you an apology, Commander Santos," Vex said finally. "And perhaps humanity as a whole. I allowed physical appearance to cloud my judgment about military capability." Rio smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. "No apology necessary, Ambassador. First impressions can be misleading. What matters is what we do when understanding becomes important." As the demonstration concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Vex found herself walking beside Director Quinn toward the administrative buildings. Her mind raced with implications for Zenthari's strategic planning and diplomatic relationships. "Director, I will need to file a comprehensive report about what I observed today," she said. "The Empire's assessment of human military capability requires significant revision." "I am pleased the demonstration proved educational," Director Quinn replied diplomatically. Vex paused in her steps, looking back toward where Rio was speaking quietly with the human cadets who had gathered around him. "Educational is insufficient to describe what occurred today. I witnessed something that challenges fundamental assumptions about warfare itself." "What will you tell the Empire?" Director Quinn asked. "The truth," Vex replied firmly. "That humanity possesses military capabilities that cannot be measured by conventional standards. That human soldiers fight not from physical superiority, but from something far more dangerous to their enemies." "Which is?" Vex watched Rio demonstrate a combat technique to an eager group of multi-species students, all of whom listened with rapt attention to his instruction. "The absolute refusal to surrender when others are counting on them," she said quietly. "That kind of determination cannot be defeated by superior numbers or technology. It can only be outlasted, and today I learned that humans are very difficult to outlast." As evening approached and the academy settled into its nighttime routine, Vex prepared her preliminary report for transmission to the Zenthari Empire. Her recommendations would reshape diplomatic and military relationships across multiple star systems. But more importantly, she had learned something profound about the nature of true strength. It was not always found in the largest muscles or the sharpest claws. Sometimes it burned quietly in the hearts of those who refused to give up, no matter how impossible the odds appeared. Human determination, she wrote in her report, represented a force that the galaxy had not yet fully recognized or appreciated. The Empire would be wise to count humans among their most valued allies rather than dismissing them as insignificant weaklings. The legend she had witnessed that day would stay with her forever, a reminder that courage comes in many forms, and that the will to fight on when hope seems lost might be the most powerful weapon of all.